Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Vancouver, Canada, we have Stevan Mirkovich. Stevan is CRO and owner of Planted Expo, a trade show, platform, and network to connect Canadians to local vegan and plant-based businesses offering new, innovative, and inspiring products, services, and practices. Welcome, Stevan.
Thanks, Fred. Glad to be on your show. Thanks for letting me be on Plant Your Seed.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. First of all, congratulations on creating Canada's largest plant-based event with over 200 vegan, edible, and lifestyle businesses. Now, how did you start Planted Expo?
That's a great question. I've been involved in event planning in a variety of ways, dating right back to elementary school. For whatever reason, I loved gathering people. I loved being in gatherings. I'm a classic social extrovert and also always keenly interested in group dynamics, and also in the power of convening people to celebrate and to move towards a common goal, and saw that transform many situations and efforts. I could go right back into my childhood, like I literally mean grade school. When I helped organize a movement of people to change the school's basically policy in terms of what age group could vote for student elections and student association participation. This was a private school here in the greater Vancouver region, and managed to do so. And we did it through convening people and having conversations and talking about things. And so I've realized that there is a really great, fantastic moment that happens when a group of people is in a room, and it could be a group of 6, or as the Planted Expo, demonstrates, thousands of people and hundreds of businesses convening to celebrate and to talk about and to investigate and to mostly, and this is the key word here, experience something really life-giving. And sometimes we gather when things are not so life-giving, but frequently in human history, we gather because things are great. So anyways, all of that preamble to say, in 2019, when my business partner and I went ahead and acquired what was then the Veg Expo here in Vancouver, it was friends of mine that had started it and grown it from a small little event to something that required a different kind of leadership. And wanting to kind of give it to a set of individuals that really wanted to see it kind of take off, and frankly, to give it over to actual vegans that were like die hard and really wanting to grow the movement and grow it across Canada and provide a platform for businesses everywhere and not just here locally in Vancouver. And those were things that we were interested in doing. And so I had been a part of the Veg Expo here in Vancouver in a variety of ways, leading up to the acquisition of the business. So we acquired it. And then, of course, before we could even do our first event as new owners, a pesky little thing called the COVID-19 pandemic sort of enveloped everybody and everything. And we ended up rebranding and calling it the Planted Expo. And finally, we're able to do our first event, double vaccinated masked event in November of 2021, which is wonderful. We were very grateful for the people that did come out. That was hard. But we were really grateful to get one under our belt. And then this past June of 2022, we had our second event in Vancouver as the new owners. And of course, this all on the giant shoulders of those who had started it before us. And we have a fantastic team. Planted Expo is our team, and it's no one person. Yeah, sure, I'm the spokesperson, but frankly, there's just an incredible group of people that pull this thing together. So yeah, we're very excited to be. It's my hometown. I was born there, even though I kind of still identify as a Vancouverite. It's really great to finally be a part of what's a really awesome vegan scene in Toronto.
And what is the most challenging part of putting this event together?
Well, here's the thing: food is interesting, and a worldview like veganism is interesting, and then you mix in the more common nomenclature these days in the general society of plant based, and you begin to realize that there's, as much as it seems very narrow,
Mm-hmm.
and it is like, we have some parameters and values that allow us to say no to certain opportunities and yes to other opportunities, but still the diversity of opinion, in particular in our world of social media, where there are some profound differences even within tightly knit communities like the vegan
Mm-hmm.
slash plant based
Mm-hmm.
communities. Probably our number one challenge is navigating that landscape and finding ways to be as absolutely inclusive as we can be. Because frankly, we're not here to be gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
We're here to be celebrators, and anything that is worthy of celebration, we want to celebrate. And that means even if it's just a sliver of a company's business,
Mm-hmm.
we want to be able to say yes to that. But
Right.
that's hard because there are people that say, oh, well, let's not celebrate the slivers. Let's only celebrate the whole kit and caboodle if it so happens to be. And that's a dichotomy that we understand,
Mm-hmm.
we get, and we sit down and we really wrestle through that, and try to figure out, well, what is our ultimate value system that guides these decisions, that allows us to show Canada and soon North America, that plant-based living is not all or nothing. For some of us, it is. I've been a vegan since 2003, vegetarian since 2001,
Mm-hmm.
and really committed to it. But I think we just need people to be, as Melanie Joy says, as vegan as is possible in their life. And so we believe the same for businesses. If they're doing something that promotes plant-based vegan living, we want to be able to say yes to that, but it's not always easy. So that's sort of the 30,000 foot answer. And I think if you ask some of my team, what are the challenges? They would say, problems with like CRM systems and emails and dead links and that kind of thing. And all the nitty gritty details. Thankfully, that's not something I personally wrestle with as much in terms of that because it's not my strength. But yeah, there are a lot of things. I mean, you could just imagine bringing that many people together over the course of a weekend. There are a lot of things to think through, but it's all worth it in the end. We wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't.
Yeah, it's hard enough to get like 5 people in a room to agree on a movie, right? Much less
Yeah,
thousands
yeah.
of people to agree what's vegan or plant based. What are you most proud of with Planted Expo?
The feeling of camaraderie. Now, again, I don't want to take credit for the
Mm-hmm.
camaraderie. I think the plant-based community, as challenging as it can be at times, or in the vegan community, as challenged as it can be at times, also has a deep and profound love and respect for one another, especially these entrepreneurs that are putting everything on the line.
Mm.
I mean, we hear the stories day in and day out, like owner operated small mom and pop things, right through to like major conglomerates here in Canada and North America, that have deep, wells of financing to keep doing what they're doing. And we see the full spectrum. But once you're on the showroom floor and people are milling about and groups of friends are trying all of the local latest plant-based cheeses or faux meats, or being blown away by all the other products that they had no clue were available in their city, and saying, oh, wow, I can get these pierogies and these dumplings. And, I can actually do business with this business that I had no idea had any vegan roots whatsoever, kind of thing.
Right.
There's this sense of camaraderie, friendship, and we're all in it together. And you really, that's palpable. Like, it's something that you walk away with and you're like, wow, that's just such a good vibe, and it's, there's consumerism, sure, there's buying and all the rest of it, which businesses need to stay alive, but
Sure.
you don't kind of walk away feeling like, it's just this big, it doesn't feel like a shopping mall,
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. It doesn't feel like it's just about the consumerism, even though we are a consumer show. It really is, just this wonderful celebration of all things plant based, and people really get a sense that they're a part of something.
Now it's your first year for Planted Expo in Toronto. What has been the reception from the city, from the businesses of Toronto?
Better than we could have imagined. I mean, it helps, I think, again. So there's the wily, kind of hard to navigate side of social media. And then there's the positive side. For years, people have been seeing what's happening here in Vancouver and saying, hey, when are you bringing this to Toronto? Or if you have any listeners in Calgary, and Montreal and other places, people are just like, hey, we like this idea of an indoor event where, Canadian weather, whether super hot summers or very cold and rainy winters or snowy winters, may not play as big a role in our experience because a lot of, veg fests tend to be outdoor events. And those are beautiful and wonderful and need to be a part of the vegan event landscape. And we're very supportive of all of that. We've chosen to do our things indoors and kind of have this more a different kind of production model around that and some of the benefits that come with being in enclosed doors. But anyways, to say more about Toronto, like, listen, Toronto's got a really great vegan landscape, plant-based landscape. And people often think of Vancouver as kind of like the vegan, West Coast, left coast. And I think a lot of that is just stereotypical kind of stories that we've heard. But the truth is, I think Toronto's scene is every bit as good as Vancouver's. And so to be able to kind of mix them all into one room together, is going to be great. And we anticipate, that after this really successful first event in Toronto, it's going to be gangbusters year two. Like, we're already as big an event as Vancouver's in year one.
Wow.
And Vancouver's event's been going on for 9 years, 10 years, 2014 was the first event in Vancouver, although it was tiny. And at that point wasn't even vegan. It was like the vegetarian veg expo. Like, there was a lot of like, what is this going to even be in its infancy? So to be where we're at today and to have Toronto embrace us the way that they have, kudos to the Toronto small business community and to all those that are buying tickets. We're super excited. You're going to get a chance to connect with thousands of other like-minded. And that's really our goal, frankly. It's not a vegan hangout. If the only people that came to our event were existing vegans, that would be a failure for us. Not because we don't want to hang out with vegans. Hey, we're vegans. We love you guys. That's great. But the goal here is to get the average plant-curious Canadian acquainted with the amazing, innovative small business products that are out in their city and that are available to them that will further this movement of compassion, health, and wellness for all.
What are some of the businesses that we can expect to see at Planted Expo?
I don't really want to single out any one particular brand, but what you'll be able to do is get a sense of lifestyle products, food products, services that are all geared and have at least in common this, that they are providing access to a plant-forward vegan lifestyle. So that in our day-to-day choices and how we vote with our dollars, we'll be able to say yes to compassion, yes to better health and wellness, and to businesses and opportunities that recognize that we are all in this together in terms of making sure that our planet and our human species and the animals that we share it with can all live the best lives. So you'll see lots of fantastic treats, lots of wonderful savory products, pies and desserts. And as I've already mentioned, alternative dairy products, alternative meat products, clothing, cosmetics, skincare, just right down the list. You'll catch it all and get to interact with some of Canada's best nonprofits that are heavily involved in making sure that people learn and that we're advocating on behalf of positive change and legislation. You'll have a chance to listen to some of the best speakers, panel conversations about things that matter. So yeah, there's really a lot for everybody. Some amazing food trucks. Come hungry because there's a lot of samples, and then there's a lot of opportunity to buy food from the vendors that will be there.
Now, there is such an impressive list of speakers for Planted Expo Toronto, which is April 29th and 30th. People like Dr. Greger, James Wilkes, John Badass Vegan, Lewis. How did you get such a great lineup of speakers?
Well, listen, I think everybody recognizes that there is power in actual human interaction and being face to face with individuals. And we live in a hyper digitalized world, digitized world, I guess is maybe the proper language there. And we have these connections, and I don't want to say that they're lesser, they're just different than embodied connections. And so when you ask somebody like a Dr. Greger, who has got, this wonderful series of nutrition facts videos that we've all watched, probably dozens, maybe hundreds of these videos, and they're such a great resource. And everybody kind of knows his voice, knows his cadence, but there's something about just being there with Dr. Greger, and it goes the other way. Like, he also sees the value in meeting and signing books and being around people and interacting on that level. So, you don't have to twist arms to get people to come to these wonderful celebrations. If it lines up with schedules and, we can kind of make it all work, it's frankly just asking. And the word gets out. We've had fantastic speakers for years. And we're going to continue to have that. Vancouver's got a great lineup of speakers as well. Most of the time, it's a quick yes, like, hey, it fits in my schedule. I'm so grateful to be, given this opportunity to be there. What would you like me to speak about? I'm like, you tell me, what do you think you should speak about, or talk about, or fireside conversations. And so we try to have a mix. We like to show just how diverse the plant-based and vegan world is. And that's not always easy to do. Some of the stereotypes are true. Like, look at us, right? A couple of white guys, white men, right?
Right.
But the truth is, it's a lot more diverse than that, thank goodness. And that has made the plant-based movement a lot stronger. We have better access to wonderful cuisines and flavors and spices from around the world. We have different perspectives on land and how to steward the land. We also have better ways of gathering. We have a wonderful young man that's going to be walking us through this wonderful land acknowledgement and the recognition of how First Nations in Canada have always had a deeper love and respect for the earth. And even those that are, part of sustenance kind of gathering and may not be vegan in the way that, veganism should be defined in terms of causing no harm, but yet have a kind of this interrelated relationship with, the animal world and how it interacts with the world around them. So, it's all of those things. So, long-winded answers to all of these questions. You didn't know who you were chatting with, did you, Fred? I'm not on too many podcasts and don't say yes too often, but, Planted Expo deserves this. And, we want people to know just what we're up to over there on that main stage. So yeah, thanks for noting that. Yeah, we do have a wonderful list of speakers that are coming. And, that's why we offer the 2-day pass, because we know that a lot of people, first and foremost, there are, going to be, I think, over 180 brands at this first event in Toronto. We're well over 200 already in Vancouver. So big events. And it's hard. It's hard to get through there, especially if you're really trying to get a sense of what it is you're consuming or what it is the services that are being provided, and you want to connect with the business owner or the team that's representing the business.
Right.
And then, like, if you want to catch the speakers, then, well, you have to carve that time out as well, in addition to catching all of the vendors that are there. So, it's 2 days, and we're grateful to be able to feature such a great list of speakers.
Okay, just so everybody knows, Planted Expo Toronto is April 29th and 30th. Planted Expo Vancouver is May 27 and 28.
Correct, yeah.
So everybody knows that it's not all happening at one time, that it's staggered across Canada at different times.
Yeah.
What is it about vegan businesses that makes you so passionate?
We talk about, double bottom lines, triple bottom lines, quadruple bottom lines. And the more you interact, with plant-based businesses, the more you recognize that these entrepreneurs and these teams of people that are coming together, there's the self-evident part of, this kind of, they strike this compassionate stance and posture in the product that they're building. But it transcends that and it goes beyond that. And I like to believe the best in everybody. And as much as there's, maybe need at times to kind of wave the greenwashing umbrella or flag or whatever, we don't feel that that's our job to do that. What we want to do, again, kind of harkening back to one of my earlier answers, if there's something worthy of celebration, we're going to take you at face value and celebrate that fact. And so, what big vegan businesses and plant-based businesses and those that provide those kinds of products are signaling to the world is that these things matter. And, and we've seen plant-based businesses make some really tough decisions in order to continue to live out their values. We've seen the opposite too. We've seen companies that feel like they can't make it as vegan businesses, add dairy back into their menus, et cetera. And that can be really challenging. That can be a really challenging decision. And we want to be able to empathize. We want to be able to know and understand, how hard that is. And that's really, really tough. We get this sense that they're in it not just to make a buck. They're in it to profoundly change the world. Again, from the smallest to the biggest, we get this sense that they are trying to make positive changes that will allow us to live more sustainable, better lives moving forward. And every little bit matters. That's the other thing that we celebrate. Sometimes, it's easy to look at the well-funded, groups that, go public and, everybody knows them. They're kind of like a household name on the tip of everybody's tongue and say, oh, wow, they're really moving the needle. Right. But, it's not just the big well-funded companies, everybody's moving the needle, even the small guys that are just getting started. And so seeing businesses, and you'll see that as you walk the floor, I'm assuming, Fred, you'll be there, I'm not sure, but you'll notice that there is people that got started like 4 or 5 months ago, and Planted Expo is their launching pad to make their brand awareness something that is available to kind of a core audience. And then there's others that have been around for, 25 years. And you're like, oh yeah, they're like one of the OGs. So, it's all of those things that we celebrate.
Let's get to your personal vegan journey. How and when did you transition to a plant-based diet?
This is like another episode. No, listen, I'm happy to try to give you the short version. I don't know that I have short versions in me, but to make a long story short, I had a catastrophic knee injury as a grade 11 skateboarding, and I was a very active kid and grew up in a classic Balkan home, that ate a lot of rich food. And I tell people all the time that I ate enough meat in the first 19 years of my life to last me a lifetime. Anyways, I went from being very active to having to wait for MRIs and knee surgeries, et cetera, and gained an enormous amount of weight in my last couple of years of high school, like 80, 100 pounds.
Wow.
A lot of weight. Like
really?
I went from a size 30 waist to a size 40 waist before I was done high school. And I was familiar, even back then, this is 2001, that eating a more plant-forward lifestyle can help you kind of figure some of those things out. Even though it took another 10, 12 years for me to suss out exactly how I was going to live a plant-forward lifestyle. I went vegetarian in 2001 and saw some success in figuring out how I was eating and how that was kind of impacting my health and wellness. And then in 2003, I read Joel Fuhrman's book, Eat to Live. And that's one of the OG books. And Joel Fuhrman's one of the OG doctors that has been talking about plant-based living for a long time. And the premise in that book is health equals nutrients divided by calories. And this whole idea of nutrient density was just like an absolute no-brainer to me. And when I started to see the nutrient density of plant-based foods and put those up against the rest of the kind of processed and animal foods world, it was just like, oh, of course I'm going to be entirely plant-based. And I wouldn't call myself vegan at that point, because vegan is a lifestyle worldview, and it's kind of bigger than just, your food choices.
Very true.
But definitely in terms of my dietary choices, I was nearly 100% vegan. Like honey took a little while for me to kind of figure out exactly how I was going to play myself out in some of these respects. But, yeah, 2003 is when I kind of demark my when it clicked for me,
Hmm.
even though it kind of needed to sort itself out for a little bit. That's when it all clicked in reading that book, Eat to Live by Joel Fuhrman. So yeah, since then I have a more complex conversation around emotional health and coping and food addiction. And because here's the thing, you can be vegan and still consume enormous amounts of refined oils and sugars and processed foods as the
Hmm.
core of your diet and not be whole food plant based. And what does that all mean? It's a long story, but yeah, that's the genesis story. I needed to regain an element of my health, and I knew that this was the path into it, even if it took me a long time to kind of suss it all out for myself.
Now, take us back to that time where you had gained like 80 to 100 pounds. How were you feeling? And then once you started on your journey, how did that feel?
Oh, oh man, you're asking for some vulnerability here. Wow, that's a long time ago for me now, Fred.
Mm.
It's an entire another lifetime since that. I mean, listen, a lot of discomfort with myself, a lot of feelings of shame for loss of athletic ability, body image issues that were spiraling downwards, and frankly, still stuff that I wrestle with to this very day. A body that eventually became covered in stretch marks. Like there's just a lot of stuff there, man. And and it's a terrible spiral downwards, um, because you start feeling bad about yourself, and if you don't have other ways to cope, and food is your addiction of choice, you're not a drinker, you don't do drugs, you don't have other classic kind of addictive outlets, it becomes food, and so you drown your sorrows in more food,
Mm.
even if that food is healthier. Anyways, yeah, so there's this sense of regaining a composure about what you're eating and how it's influencing you. But I yo-yoed for about a decade trying to figure out exactly what my relationship to food was going to be. And listen, a food addiction is different than any other addiction. You don't have to take another sip of alcohol the rest of your life, and nobody's going to bat an eyelash. And frankly, that's fine. You can do abstinence when
Right.
it comes to alcohol or drugs or narcotics or any number of addictions.
Hmm.
But food is different. Food is something you have to eat if you want to live. You can't just say, "Well, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to do food anymore." Like,
Yeah.
how does that work? People don't recognize that if that's your coping mechanism, and these are highly addictive substances. Like
Mm.
you cram, salt, sugar, and fat into a food, and look at how a brain reacts on an fMRI, and you recognize that they're every bit as addictive as heroin or cocaine.
Hmm.
The difference is that it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You have to go to find heroin and cocaine, or any number of addictive substances. Maybe alcohol and cigarettes are a little bit more ubiquitous, kind of like food, but still not the same thing. Again, you never have to smoke another cigarette, and a lot of Canadians don't anymore, or around the world. But you have to find a way. You have to redefine your relationship to food,
Right.
and that is a never ending journey because there are social constructs, cultural constructs. There are any number of things, not to mention the nutrition wars. And just, you go through it, and it's a much more difficult. No, okay, I don't want to say it like that. I don't want to demean anybody else's journey with addiction and rediscovery of themselves. It is a uniquely complicated and confusing journey to
Mm.
wrestle through your food choices. Um, and so, yeah, plant based living resonates deeply. It has this ring of truth to it when you start consuming high fiber diet, and you only later realize, like, I had no idea, like nobody was talking about the microbiome in 2001 and
Right.
2003 when I started. And kind of making that connection wasn't there. And it's only later that you're like, oh, I was feeding a bunch of fiber to this, microbial colony inside of me that was so happy. And, the connections between gut health and brain health and emotional health. Like, look, I could talk for hours about this stuff. But yeah, you just start regaining a sense of yourself. You start regaining a sense of, what feels good and what feels right. And I say, I'm famous for saying, nothing tastes as good as health feels.
Mm, I like
Nothing
that.
tastes as good as health feels. But even that is kind of a truism, but easier said than done, maybe sometimes. Again, because it's just you're surrounded by it all the time, and you have to make that choice, and willpower can fail us. So, willpower can fail us, and so it's about setting yourself up for success day in and day out. And this is a much broader conversation than simply veganism or plant-based living. It goes well beyond any of that. So this is a journey to self-discovery and who we are. And what we choose to eat is certainly a huge part of our identities, but it is not all of our identities. And we are all both, we play a variety of roles and we wear many hats in this life. And all of those things impact our day-to-day choices in terms of how we choose to feed ourselves. And so, yeah, there's a lot there.
What would you say to someone else that's struggling with food addiction? How did you go about changing your relationship to food?
I mean, listen, uh, it's concurrent. There's a lot of things that are happening simultaneously in that journey, and if they're not, then you're likely to have elements of relapse. And relapse is, again, an interesting word in this because where it's so easy to fall off, your sobriety in many of these other classic, addictions stories. Food is an interesting one. Like, okay, so you go out for a meal, and is perfection what we're up against? And what does perfection even look like? And is there a perfect diet? There isn't. Like, none of those things. It's just not as black and white. It's not as either or. So, for people that are struggling with food addiction, how do you redevelop your relationship to food? It's one, the cliche, one meal at a time.
Mm.
It's by and large setting yourself up for success. So the vast majority of us eat the majority of our meals at home, I think. Unless you're a lot wealthier than I am and can afford to eat out a lot more than I do,
Mm-hmm.
chances are you're still eating the majority of your food at home. And if that's the case, setting yourself up for success and making sure that what's in your house are things that you are proud of, that you want to eat, that you want to support, and that are going to provide a healthy relationship to food. Of these you may eat freely kind of idea, like making sure that the things in your house are things that every time you eat them, you feel good about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the majority of the battle. And then once you step away from your home, making sure that you've got a game plan. So, what I did often as I was rediscovering my own relationship to food is I never traveled anywhere without some of my easily accessible fruit snacks, like real fruit. I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean like packaged fruit snacks. I mean like having an apple or a pear or a banana or an orange or any number of fruits available to me. At times, I actually had a little bowl, stainless steel bowl that I carried in my car with fruit, so
Mm.
that when those pangs to eat were there, I could eat as many of those pieces of fruit as was necessary for me to cope with whatever emotional dysregulation I was experiencing at the moment. And while that may not have been the best course of action, it was at least not sabotaging what I was trying to do with my health and wellness. So if I ate 4 apples in a row, like at least they were apples and not chocolate bars of
Yeah.
some kind, or any number of wonderful vegan pastries that are available, or vegan burgers that are available, or any number of things. As I was kind of figuring that out. So I don't know. I'm a little overwhelmed by the question, frankly, because it's a journey that I still live day in and day out. And you know, um, it's an ever evolving conversation.
As you said, it's got to be very difficult to deal with because you have to eat. So, like you say, you have to set yourself up for success. You have to find a way to eat better, right? So, where are you at in that journey right now? Are you still struggling?
Yeah, oh, it's like people that are in AA and go to AA forever, even though they haven't had a sip of alcohol in 30 years. Why?
Mm,
I'm so and so, and I'm an alcoholic. Well, you haven't had a drip of alcohol in 30 years. Like, are you still an? Yeah, I say the same thing. Like, listen, um, yeah, it is a constant struggle, and you know, the same things that get in the way of healthy choices around exercise or um, you know any other number of issues around well-being, catching enough sunlight in the day, catching enough fresh air in the day, um, high stress environments, full busy schedules, any number of those things can at any given stretch of days or weeks or months, um, make it more challenging to live your best life. And what I've just chosen to embrace in a way that I think is not the case in a lot of other journeys towards sobriety. And I'm using sobriety in the most broad umbrella term,
sure.
because obviously, it may not be as, you know, uh, you may not be drunk on sugar in the same way that one is drunk on alcohol, but, um, you know, uh, I've chosen to embrace the vicissitudes, the ups and downs, the lefts and rights of being a dad. I'm a dad of three,
Hmm.
of being deeply social and caring more about people, and being at a dinner party where my host uh, and the individual that is feeding me that day has gone out of their way to make this a vegan meal, knowing that that's the primary consideration when they're having Steve Mirkovich over for a meal. And they're not necessarily thinking about the salt content or the sugar content or the fat content, and me not turning my nose up to something that maybe I wouldn't choose to eat on a regular basis, but saying, this is wonderful, what a bounty, and prioritizing my relationship to that individual and my relationship to that particular social encounter, and saying, this relationship and this encounter and this human matters more to me than whether or not this particular meal has more oil in it than I would cook with at home, as an
Right.
example. So, it's just so complex, Fred. I don't really know where to go with this. Like, we could talk about it for a long time. But yeah, like, it's a wonderful dilemma in a sense, because there's a lot of creativity that can go into it. And I think the world of the internet and those that are looking for ways to live their best lives and still prioritize their nutrition is vast. And I think um, it's connected to a lot of other daily practices too, in terms of finding the wherewithal to make the choices. So, when you're more active, you tend to care more about what you eat.
Hmm.
When you are prioritizing your mental health and finding moments of rest and reflection, in terms of who and what you are, you also find greater bandwidth to make the choices with the food that you're eating. And that's true in my life. So yes, I'm struggling. I just recently launched a vegan cafe that is meant to be an accessible point of um, a vegan plant-based food culture here. And it's been a heavy lift, and we spent a lot of hours, and there's a lot of stress that comes with that. And so, my day-to-day choices in terms of my activity levels, have not been where they customarily have been over the last decade.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm having to wrestle through that. And that has implications around my my day-to-day choices. And as a business owner, figuring out how to make that work um, is something that I haven't done before in that sense. I've never started this kind of an endeavor. And so, it's a new landscape for me. And therefore, I'm discovering new things about myself. And I still go to counseling regularly. It's not food addictions counseling, it's just general therapist like, hey, I've got stuff I'm wrestling with, yo,
Sure.
help me out. And those are things that I'm working through. So yeah, it doesn't end. It's something you're always navigating. It's not like you're ever on the other side of it entirely. Sure, there are elements like I'm never going to buy, like as much as I love the fact that there are a whole host of vegan products available, I'm actually never going to go and buy myself a vegan Kit Kat.
Mm.
Not because I don't think there should be vegan Kit Kats in the world, but it's just not something I'm ever going to consume because of my history,
Right.
because of who I am. I'm grateful that it's in the world because there's people that are going to eat Kit Kats, and I'd rather they eat vegan Kit Kats because of the animal ethics side of it, because of the sustainability and planetary implications. I think vegan Kit Kats should be in the world, but I'm never going to buy one personally.
Right.
And so, it's all of those things.
Do you meditate and exercise as a way to kind of help yourself channel away from the food addiction?
I'm a deeply spiritual individual, and I value my spirituality and my the fact that I'm seeking out those transcendent moments, those things that go beyond what it is that it feels like in the sort of the immediacy of any one moment. Even though I'm living deeply in the now, it's not just about that. Like, there's just, yes. So I do have spiritual practices that ground me in a variety of ways. Have they influenced my relationship to food? Absolutely. Do I at times meditate about that and pray about that and reflect on those things in kind of a meditative moment? Yes. But my practices around those things are not focused entirely on who I am and what I eat. When I say who I am, I mean in that kind of element of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the only reason that I have these practices. And yes, I love sport. I love being outdoors. That's why I choose to live here on the West Coast. I think access to the outdoors, to the ski hills, to the green, and the kind of temperatures that allow us to be outside and run all year, and take walks and not feel like the weather is in the way. All of those things are deeply important to me. So yes, historically, and even presently, maybe not to the degree that I would love, I have been and do partake in those things, and they are deeply important practices for me as I continue to grow into and become the person that I want to be in my fullness.
What have you learned from this whole journey that you're on?
That's a really broad question too, Fred. I feel like I've learned mostly, how to be, well, mostly. I've learned some really deep and important lessons. Again, they're broad. There's little itty bitty things that I've learned, and then there's some really huge, kind of game changing things. Like the posture I take towards myself needs to be as generous and as grace filled as it is with others. So if I'm not going to look at others in a judgmental spirit around the choices that they're making and recognize their journeys and the freedom that they have to make the choices that they need to make around however they're going to engage these life-giving things, I need to have that same level of generosity and grace towards myself. Love yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And in learning to do so, we are far more patient with the world around us. And when we don't confront our own demons, and we don't confront our own areas of if we don't confess those areas in our life that are in process and in a place of transformation where we are going from one stage of development to the next in terms of how we want to engage the world around us and ourselves, then we have a much harder time extending that same level of empathy to others. And so, yeah, that's probably been the number one lesson that I've learned is as I struggle, despite the brain knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it was in 2003 that I was convinced of like, the healthfulness of, a whole food plant-based diet, just to stay on topic today, right? But to this very day, 20 years later, we're sitting here in 2023. That was 2003 that book was published and I read it. I still wrestle through that, right? I don't always make the most nutrient dense choice.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I've learned something about the context in which those choices are made. And I choose to extend grace and generosity towards myself as I continue to live those things out. And that has helped me do the same with those that I live with. And that's probably been the number one lesson for me. And it's an important one because we can get overwhelmed and feel like if perfection isn't attained, well, therefore, let's just throw it all away. And that's not worth it.
You mentioned apples and having them in your car. What is one habit, hack, or tip that you would say to people that are transitioning to a plant-based diet that might help them?
Discover the recipes and flavors that you absolutely love. Listen, if you're a fanatic for Mexican food, then eat Mexican 5, 6, 7 days a week if you have to, as you're transitioning, because these are flavors that you're familiar with. You know what they're supposed to taste like in your omnivorous days, and you can continue to tweak them, and they will be comforting, and they will trigger all of the feel-good responses in yourself, both on that social cultural kind of memory side of things, but also like this biological flavor profiles. These will be things that you know and love, and figuring out how to dial in those recipes so that your favorite foods can still be your favorite foods is really important. So are those Indian curries? Are those wonderful stir fries? Are they sandwiches? What are they? What is it that you were go-to foods for you before transitioning towards veganism, plant-based living, or whole foods plant-based living? And then dial those recipes in, find them, and stick to them really close as you're making those transitions. And then you'll slowly find your way in terms of everything else that comes across your plate over time. But finding those tried and true that you just know, like, hey, tonight, when I go home, if I make this, smorgasbord of taco fixins, I'm going to have a meal that I love, that's plant-based, that's good for the planet, good for the animals, and good for me.
That's a great tip. That's a fantastic tip. I think that when you kind of settle into who your family is and who you are, it just makes it a lot easier for people. Now, is there a cookbook or book or even a documentary that you feel would be great for someone transitioning to a plant-based diet?
Listen, there's been an absolute explosion of cookbooks coming from a variety of perspectives, like really narrow cultural explorations of plant-based living to kind of like scrappy cooking, that are great. I love cookbooks. I love recipe books. I do like the heady kind of like nutrition focused things that are out there, and the doctors and scientists that are putting out wonderful materials. And then I love like the memoir kind of approach as well. There's a lot of books that I've read that have been really helpful, and cookbooks that I have and that I go to that are really great. And I feel, given just my kind of position here, from the Planted Expo and the friendships that I've made over time with a lot of these authors, I'd be remiss to single out any one of them because they all play a role. And again, it's you identifying in your heart what it is that you think, like nobody wants a cookbook that just sits on a shelf, right? Like find a cookbook that you look through and you're like, man, I actually want to try at least 50% of these recipes, and then go for it. There are some great authors and cookbooks that'll be represented at the Toronto event. Recently published books, books that have stood the test of time also will be represented. So there's a lot of places to go. And likewise with films, that have played a big role in people's transitions. Like you mentioned, James Wolfe's going to be there. I think Game Changers stands the test of time. It's been 5 years. Yeah. And, I think if you go back and you're a plant-based, sometimes you go back and you rewatch things and you might cringe a little bit because new data has come out and you're like, oh, I don't know that we'd say that quite the same way anymore. Or, maybe we'd nuance that slightly differently. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's entirely not true about the Game Changers, but I think it stood the test of time. And that's certainly a good one. As an athlete type myself, I find that's a really great place. And I know my kids, I've got a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Less so the 4-year-old. I don't even think she's obviously hasn't watched it, but my 15-year-old to this day is proud of the fact that he is an elite basketball athlete here in the city of Vancouver, on a bona fide travel team. And, he's proud of the fact that for 15 years, he's never had meat or dairy, and he tells his teammates that, and he plays at a high level, and, he's strong like a bull, Yeah. And people are like, oh, you're built like that. And you eat vegetables, like as your primary source of nutrition, and Game Changers played a big role in his commitment to that, just as he was really kind of coming to his own awareness around wanting to be an athlete. So, yeah, that's a good one for sure.
Finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you were vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
Trapped/stuck before. Oh man, there's a lot of words that I want to use about that time. But stuck and trapped will have to suffice for today. And then one word to describe my experience today is abundance. And I use the word abundance very thoughtfully because my experience of the culinary world literally exponentially exploded when I became a vegan. My appreciation for the culinary and flavor profiles that are present in our world and the things that are edible for us and that provide such a cornucopia of colors and flavors and experiences and textures, just like exploded. I went from eating a very limited amount of foods to eating so many more foods. And so I have to say that abundance is the word that really comes to mind when I think about my experience as a vegan. So
I love that. Yeah. So trapped and stuck and abundance. I love that. Yeah. It's great. It's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is the best way for people to follow you, support you on the web and social media in general?
I don't personally post very much as an individual, but please follow Planted Expo on Instagram and Facebook. If you're curious about what I'm up to here in Vancouver, you can follow Feast and Fallow Cafe. Those are a couple of places that I'm very active and participating. So yeah, thank you so much, Fred, for the time and energy that it takes to run a successful podcast. And we wish you the very best in highlighting amazing stories from around the world, I'm sure, and putting this wonderful life-giving movement in the forefront and giving it the opportunity to breathe into your listeners' experiences. So thank you so much too, Fred. I appreciate being here today.
Thank you, Stevan, for being on Plant Your Seed.
Thank you.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.